Cellar. And if you didn't get that, welcome to the Curmudgeon in the Cellar. Good news. We hit 1,200 in the subscribers. Now, if about half of you would watch each one, I'd really drive some traffic. But I appreciate your subscribing. And if you're watching this and you haven't, please do. A number of things to talk about tonight. I have a whole list of them. We'll start with introducing new players. This stems from a conversation I had this evening with a game designer who's working on a project that he wants to tailor to introducing people. And my advice to anybody that's trying to get new people, hey, come try it, is don't overwhelm them with stuff. I can give an example of something I did a couple of years ago for some friends of my wife who wanted, when they found out what I did, would he run a game for us? Okay. And they were a bunch of Zumba people. And so I made them all members of a sect or a sisterhood of people that worked out and ate organic and did meditation and were really, really good with these little 5-foot walking sticks that they all use to get around in the rough terrain. And somebody stole their bell and they had to go track the bugbears down, literally tracking their footprints and chasing them down and get the bell back. Now, I made it simple in that I gave them all a believable background. They're all enthusiasts of working out, so they all get to play fit. Hey, we're fit, no matter whether they were or not. And I gave them a simple task. I didn't bog them down in armor and weaponry and stuff like that. I gave them wild dogs, mischievous pixies, the bugbears, of course. Nothing that was was likely to TPK them. And they all had a great time, and I'm sure that if I was willing to spend the time, they'd be more than delighted, those of them who are still in the area, for me to run a game for them. But that's not where I'm going. So anyway, the point being, start with something simple. If you're dealing with kids define, bright 9, 10-year-olds up, do something simple, something they can relate to without getting down into the arcana of armor and hit points and, all that kind of stuff. Just get them the idea of assuming a role and trying new stuff. And when you get them through one of those and they go, hey, this is cool, I think I might want to go deeper, or, I want to do it again or something. Well, hey, you may have a new player for your group. So you've done a good thing. Don't overwhelm them with stuff. Give them a low-level pre-generated character, and just give them a brief what their stats actually mean and what they relate to. You can do that in under about 3 minutes, 4 minutes. Okay, I know what all these numbers mean. This is who I am. And you're off and ready to go. If you spend a whole lot of time in prep, it's boring. If you don't know what you're doing, it's twice as boring. So that's my advice on getting newbies introduced to the game when you're seeking new recruits. Let's see, what else do I have here? A number of different topics to talk about tonight. Oh yeah, well, there was the wag who responded to the last one with the desert. The nice thing about the desert is you can remember your name because there ain't no, thanks. I could have done that, but I let you do it. But speaking of the desert, there's many other things I didn't go into, like rashes and sand getting into bad places, and so if you want to challenge your players with environments, the desert's a great one. Quicksand, shifting sands, mirages, wonderful stuff. Also had a response on alignment, and this kind of goes to another topic that I'm going to talk about tonight. And that, I said that originally in a lot of the mythos and originally in the game, elves were not Tolkien's, they weren't Legolas. They weren't friendly to people necessarily. It was the odd one that chose to adventure with humans. And they were willful, they were capricious, they were chaotic neutral. And in many of the mythos of Europe and Asia, in that they might call them the same, but they fill the same niche in their mythology. They were mostly ornery. Yeah, I don't know how to put it exactly, and apologies to Bob Salvatore and Drizzt, because really ornery. Drizzle, whatever his name is. Elves were just not these nice people. They were much more likely to do mischievous things and changelings and things like that, which certainly weren't nice. We fought against the Tolkien image of that for about 6 minutes and realized it was futile. There were elves and dwarves and halflings. They were hobbits at first, because those were recognizable. We knew tons and tons and tons of people that read The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, and so that was something they could grasp onto. They'd already figured out in their mind, and this is one of the beautiful things, particularly the early days before there wasn't art to mess it up for you. If you'd have said, all right, you 6 players, sit there, close your eyes, here comes a dwarf stomping down the hall, you could have read their 6 minds. They would have had 6 slightly different pictures of dwarves. Well, then the movies came out and they got stereotyped again, as they always do. Not that the movies weren't great fun, not that armor wasn't really neat and all that. But you got a sense in the movies, the Lord of the Rings movies, at the end there, that the elves and the dwarves did not get along. They weren't all that happy working with the people, and that got overlooked in the glory that was Legolas. Dwarves in most European mythologies are not friendly people. Maybe, I don't know, Rumpelstiltskin a dwarf? He's this little weird creature, and he's mischievous and only will do something when you hold him captive and have a big bond on him. But dwarves were pretty ornery people, and they just weren't that friendly in a lot of the mythos. You go back in the Germanic stuff, and dwarves are dark deep in the mountains and dark and brooding and avaricious and not, they weren't Tolkien's dwarves, and they weren't Gimli, and we fought against that. But again, like I said, not for all that long, because there it was. Hobbits, okay, they were thrown in because Gary knew everybody had been reading Tolkien's books. It was that time in the 70s when those books were becoming wildly popular through a certain segment of the population. Pardon me. I got to oil the tonsils. So they weren't put in because of Tolkien, almost despite, because Gary did not embrace Tolkien's world. He didn't build his world on that. If you want to know what he built his world on, go read Appendix N. Google it. You can find it. Those are the authors. They also happen to be most of the same authors that I read growing up, which is how Gary and I became such instant friends. And I went to work for him. We had so much shared background. and we kind of thought along the same lines independently. Let's see, what else? Have I ever made up a monster on the spot? I don't know. I've given him an ability or a power, capriciously, just to shock a smug group of players back into doing, into paying attention to what they're doing. That's usually in the early con game. Well, for me, in my return to gaming, the what I call the early con games would have been in between 6 and 10, when I was traveling around and running games and gaining my deserved reputation for TPKs. And well, I kind of got over that. But what I like to do is, if a group gets complacent, I like to let this thing that they thought it's just a hobgoblin. Well, yeah, it's just a hobgoblin that maybe he's wearing something around his neck that gives him mind control powers. Well, they never saw that coming with a hobgoblin. This thing might grab it and say something in hobgoblinish, and all three of them got to make saves for paralyzation. Strange abilities. I've done nasty things to players that were entirely in keeping with the adventure. When you go to the temple on the Arredondo, in Snake Riders, the Snake Riders of the Arredondo that I wrote, you're harassed and hassled several times by giant apes, both wild and trained, and they throw feces, which effectively means there'll be no more surprise. You will not gain surprise on anybody for the remainder of the party, or the remainder of the adventure, because you stink. And they didn't see that one coming. I've gone both ways. I once had an adventure where there was a big bad thing, but it only had like 9 hit points left, because it was sick. I don't know, whatever. There was a reason it had 9 hit points left. And so boom, boom, down it went. And they're all just standing there looking at each other like, holy cow, 9 hit points. And we just killed an ogre. And I've also had really tough things. I'll make them tougher than normal. You only think that goblins run hit points from here to there. My goblins are Uruk-hai goblins. Mine run bigger, or mine have a natural resistance to this or that or whatever. And sometimes I'll do it on the spot, but I usually think those things ahead, and I want to keep the surprise. I want to keep the wonder. I want to keep the adventure. I don't want it to become mundane and boring. And it's so easy to become mundane and boring. Oh yeah, it's an orc, and it's got so many hit points, and yada da da. I want them to see something that looks like a mind flayer that isn't. That scares the hell out of them anyway. I once had a mind flare, and he was having a migraine, and he couldn't do anything, but he'd just pop his head around the corner down at the end of the hall, and the party just booked. They did that for about an hour. It was really fun. Of course, the mind flare, and he knew how to get around. Okay. Here, and this guy that asked this question talks about grudge monsters. Why not? I don't do grudge monsters per se, though I created a grudge monster, I guess, by most definitions. When I created the Boule, I created it to like to dig hobbits out of their holes and eat dwarven ponies, because hobbits and dwarven ponies were overrunning the game world of the shared D&D world at that time. And so that was a grudge monster created for a purpose. And we sometimes did that. We created several psionic, new psionic ability monsters when we created psionics, so that there was a reason to have it, not just the mind flayer or the brain mole. And especially if humans might have these very supposed to be extremely slim chance of having a psionic ability of some sort. He talks about shock and fear factor. I can buy that. Yeah, shock and fear factor is fun. I once had a group of golly, what were they? They might have been bugbears, but they were fireproof, literally fireproof. And of course, the party didn't know that, and so these pack of bugbears comes howling down the trail, about 9 or 10 of them. And the mage lobs in a fireball, makes a beautiful called shot. It goes off, and they keep running right through it. No damage from the fire whatsoever. you can hear the jaws dropping all around the table. So yeah, I've been known to do that kind of stuff once in a while. That brings me to another topic of just monsters in general. And again, I have this stems back to a conversation I had earlier today. It's the same conversation. And he was discussing making a book of monsters, and I told him not to waste his time because there's 100 books of monsters out there. Most of them were Drek. And I encouraged him in the writing of what he's writing to look at nature and have fun with that. You don't need a lot, there's 3 kinds of monsters in the fantasy role-playing world, the aggregate world today. There's superfluous ones, useful ones, and silly ones. No offense intended to anyone from the United Kingdom that may be watching this, but when the Fiend Folio came out, I thought that was the silliest thing I had ever seen. People were trying to outdo each other, coming up with weird, bizarre, sketchy monsters. As anybody who's played in anything I've written or run at cons will tell you, I rely on Mother Nature a lot. When real caimans grow to anywhere to 14 to 16 feet, and I've got you pulling on a raft up a river full of big caimans, it's just as scary as running into a troop of goblins, because those caimans are trying to get up onto that raft half the time and eat you. And they're capable of doing both. Caimans can climb trees and fences, chain link fences, but which, I wouldn't have in my game, but still and all, run 6 feet up a tree, and here comes a caiman after you because they can get up 8 or 10, depending how big they are. Giant praying mantises that when they stand up on their back 4 legs, they're 6 feet tall. And praying mantises, when you study them, they always strike for the head, and they're blindingly fast. I don't need something with 3 horns and 2 tails and 5 eyes that sucks up river water and snorts bubblegum bubbles to ensnare you. I don't need that. I can come up with plenty of things that can both terrorize you and threaten you without that. Sure, we're fantasy games, and so I play with a lot of the tropes, granted. And magic works, obviously, but in my worlds, magic doesn't work the same everywhere. So I do those kind of things to the players. Oh, well, that spell didn't work very well. And they finally figure out they're in a low magic area. Keep them guessing. Don't be capricious. Don't be arbitrary. When you think you want to beef up something and something different, you want to know the best thing to do as a DM? write it down in advance. And then when they go, you just did that now. No, here it is, already written out. That's just something I was saving for you. Then it becomes a grudge monster, I guess, if I actually understand that. Okay. I had an interesting question about the caller. Now, I don't see the caller so much anymore at a lot of the games, though I usually request that somebody become that at any games I run. And there's a reason for that. And I rather imagine that I started doing it on my own. And I rather imagine it developed the same way at Gary's table. And that was simply to make order out of chaos. If you have 6 or 5 or 8 really excited players, they're all, do this, do that, we're going to go left, let's go here, let's go there. So in the very early days, it was like, whoa, hang on a second. Let's get some order here. Appoint somebody to speak. And so that's the origin that, as I understand it, and that's certainly the way it began in my campaign without knowing about that. Gary hadn't told me about, get a caller. I simply did it to get one voice instead of 9. And sometimes it was worse than that because, as I've mentioned before, sometimes I had 12 or 13 players, or sometimes even more. And so it was bedlam. It was the Tower of Babel, the Table of Babel. So it was like, no. And we had another thing that nobody seems to bother with today, and that was the mapper. So the party had a designated mapper. Nobody wanted to be stuck as the mapper. But we generally found out who did it the best, and they got the job, unless they were total dicks and refused, because it was one for all for one. Especially in those early days, you wouldn't even think about stealing from your adventuring group, your hobo band. So the mapper became necessary because none of this was published. All of us DMs were drawing this stuff up by hand, and they had to figure out how to get the hell back out. The caller took the consensus from the group and relayed it. They were like the jury foreman, if you will, on a much faster evolving basis. Now, something that I noticed in my group was that a couple of guys that at the beginning I wouldn't have picked showed really strong innate leadership qualities. And when they were calling, and over the course of the campaign, by that time we'd boiled down to about 9 players, 6 or 7 of which had played at least once a week together. By that time, the caller had become the de facto party leader through skill and ability, not title. And so the other players would defer because, hey, this guy seemed... It wasn't just a charisma that drew people to listen to you. You also had to be, pretty right, pretty much at the time. But there's always a couple of players like that in every group that plays a while. They just you swear they're sneaking in and reading your notes at night, but they get it. So the caller in some groups, again, like I said, some groups never had one. But I would imagine that most DMs said something similar to what I did. Whoa, wait a minute. I can't listen to 7 of you. And so in the early days, I think that's why we had callers. It was easier on the DM. When the caller made bad decisions, they weren't the caller anymore. That's how the cream raised to the top. They made bad decisions as the caller. Bad idea. Okay, I got one other thing. A couple of days ago, I had a very interesting Skype conversation with a gentleman named, however the pronunciation in French is of Gregory, who has a podcast called Icosydra, which is the French pronunciation of icosahedron. Now that's spelled, and you might want to write this down, Icosadre. And I'll even show you a link to one of the YouTubes. Now, the majority of them are in French. I understand. I don't read French either. I don't understand French either. But there's a two-parter on there where he did an interview with Mark Miller all about Traveler that I think you might find very interesting. So I would say it might be worth your time to at least go check it out. It's a two-parter. Once you find the first one, again, I'll show you the address here in just a second because it's much too long to spell out, but I'll show you for a couple of seconds. And let's see, I'll get this up where there, it's in the blue at the bottom. And check that out. That's the YouTube video. I believe they also have a Facebook page. Anyway, I'm sorry, this is waving. The air conditioning's blowing the paper back and forth. That should be enough time, I hope. If not, say something in one of the response emails. He called to one. He was interested in the history of TSR and D&D, and of course, yeah, I'm the last guy that can be interviewed about those years because I'm the last one with these marbles. So it was quite an interesting talk. The gentleman had obviously done his homework on statements I'd made in the past and stuff. So what I watched with Mark Miller, he obviously had done his homework. So I think you might enjoy it. It's subtitled in English by his lady, who I met, who lived a year in Minnesota at an international school exchange type thing. Very nice lady. And I met the cat as well. Nice people. If you understand French, well, by all means, go check it out. He seemed to be a nice guy. And on that note, and that free plug, I'll say that I'll see you at Gamehole. But before you leave for Gamehole, you better vote. If you're an American citizen, you better vote. Now, I give them my time every election to work as an election official in Ohio. I have voted in every single election that I have been eligible to vote in since I turned old enough to vote. No, don't pat me on the back. Strive to match that. Go out and vote. It's never been more important than voting. And I'm going to keep honking on this because it is important. Ciao.